For 3,000 years, the treasures of Tutankhamun lay entombed beneath Egypt's desert sands. Until archaeologists disturbed the pharaoh's rest and unleashed a deadly curse. It's a controversial issue that scientists dismiss out of hand. Yet the threat of an ancient curse has enthralled the public for nearly 100 years. When an Egyptian king died suddenly 3,000 years ago, it marked the start of an ancient murder mystery that baffles scientists to this day. Far more chilling than the death of this young pharaoh is the mystery of his curse, said to have caused a sinister series of deaths that began with the opening of his tomb in 1922. This is the story of Tutenkahmun. It's set against the backdrop of Egypt. This country of awe-inspiring natural beauty is more than twice the size of Texas. Egypt sits on the Mediterranean Sea at the northeast corner of Africa, between Libya, Israel, and the Sudan. It's a land steeped in mysticism, which shrouds the most magnificent monuments in the world. Architecture of colossal proportions bears silent witness to a glorious past. Thousands of years ago, Egypt was home to the ancient Egyptians, at that time the most advanced civilization on Earth. They practiced science, had developed written language, and had a complex religion. And it's here in Egypt that a fantastic detective story played out, bringing triumph and victory, as well as terror and tragedy. When archaeologists discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in Egypt's desert hills, they found treasures that defied imagination. But did they also unearth more than they'd bargained for? The story starts half a world away from the wonders of Egypt, in England. This is Highclere Castle, 60 miles west of London. It is home to the 8th Lord Carnarvon, godson of the Queen. His great-grandfather, George Herbert, was the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. It was his fascination with ancient Egypt that led to the discovery of Tutankhamun.
He was one of the last great sort of Edwardian gentleman adventurers. He was a terrific character with a wide range of interests in horse racing, photography, fast cars. And it was, in fact, because of hitting a tree with a fast sports car, he damaged his lungs. And he was advised by doctors to winter in climates with dry air.
So in 1903, George Herbert, Lord Carnarvon, headed to Egypt, where he could indulge his passion for photography. At the turn of the century, Egypt was a land shrouded in mystery. Immense pyramids that defied comprehension in the West gave rise to the belief that the Egyptians had supernatural powers. Egypt presented Lord Carnarvon with an intoxicating combination of ancient monuments and mysticism. And it was in Egypt that Lord Carnarvon met the dedicated archaeologist, Howard Carter. Carter was a maverick with great determination. His ambition was to find the tomb of an ancient Egyptian king, known as a pharaoh. To do that, he would have to organize an excavation here in the Valley of the Kings, where the pharaohs of ancient Egypt were buried 3,500 years ago. By the time Western archaeologists arrived more than 100 years ago, grave robbers had already plundered the tombs. But Carter was convinced that one royal tomb had survived undisturbed. Little did he know how magnificent it would be. But his quest required money. So he came to Highclere and Lord Carnarvon for help.
It was a partnership. It was the pair of them. And it wasn't just the case that my great-grandfather was funding the thing, because he took an enormous interest in everything and was excited about every find. So the two were fascinated by the fact that there could be an intact tomb somewhere.
It would prove to be a winning combination: the aristocratic earl and the passionate archaeologist. Their find would transport the world thousands of years back in time, unearthing fantastic treasures, but perhaps disturbing the forces of evil. It was a find that took a long time in coming.
Many of the great discoveries and achievements in the world are because people really believe in something, even if it appears a hopeless quest to start with, but they kept at it.
Their first real lead came in 1907 when a minor discovery was made in the Valley of the Kings. Excavators were working near an insignificant tomb known as KV 54. A worker clearing out the pit of the tomb unearthed a vital clue: artifacts bearing the name of Tutenkahmun. Perhaps these were the remains of the pharaoh's burial feast that would have taken place near his tomb. It would be 12 years before they found out.
It must have had its frustrations and difficulties, and I know that they were sort of arguing about the cost of things and how long it was taking.
Egyptian bureaucracy and the First World War meant the excavation was slow and unrewarding. As the 20s dawned, they found they had nothing but the artifacts unearthed more than a decade earlier. In 1921, Lord Carnarvon decided to quit. Howard Carter returned to Highclere to convince him otherwise.
My great-grandfather, being a bit of a gambling man, said, "Oh God, then I will fund you for another year and we'll keep on going for one more year."
His instincts were to prove correct. On November 1st, 1922, a boy working on Carter's excavation uncovered a step. It was the first significant find in more than 10 years. Carter could only dream of where it might lead. By the following day, they had cleared a whole staircase, disappearing deep below ground. As Carter descended into the gloom, he could only guess at what lay before him. Perhaps he was standing at the entrance to the only undisturbed tomb of a pharaoh. At the bottom of the steps stood this wall imprinted with some faint and illegible seals. Could the wall be concealing the treasures he sought? Carter sent a telegram to Carnarvon with the news, advising him to hurry to Egypt. Before leaving, Carnarvon held a séance in one of the bedrooms at Highclere. Here, a clairvoyant warned him that danger lurked inside the tomb. But the Earl ignored the ominous prediction and returned to Egypt. Soon after his arrival, excavators broke down the first wall and cleared the passageway beyond. To their frustration, it led to another wall. But then their spirits soared. It was stamped with the seal of Tutenkahmun. Carter and Carnarvon could only dare hope that behind this wall were the treasures they had sought for so many years. In the eerie silence, Howard Carter struck the first blow, perhaps sealing the fate of more than 30 people who would die before their time. Inside the tomb, a sinister creaking could be heard. When Carter inserted a candle to check for foul gases, the flame flickered violently as stale air trapped for thousands of years escaped. What lay behind the wall would soon be revealed. When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon broke into Tutankhamun's tomb, they shed light on a treasure trove that had lain in darkness for more than 3,000 years. Thoughts of a curse lay far from their minds. For them, it was a moment they would cherish forever.
The seal on the door hadn't been broken. They were the first people who were seeing it. That would have been like the 6 numbers of the lottery coming up. I mean, can you imagine after all those years? I mean, it must have been wild.
What they had discovered was the first part of the tomb, the antechamber. It held everything a pharaoh might need in the afterlife. Photographs taken at the time show a priceless hoard of staggering proportions. The sounds they heard from inside the tomb were the sacred objects adjusting as fresh air rushed in, injecting this moribund world with a new lease of life. Meanwhile, outside the tomb, something sinister had taken place. Just as Carter was breaking down the wall, a snake stole into his house and killed his pet bird. It was a chilling omen. In ancient Egypt, a pharaoh was given a headdress adorned with a snake, which defended its master by spitting in his enemy's eye. Had the curse of Tutankhamun claimed its first victim? The incident fueled press speculation that the archaeologists had discovered something sinister in the tomb, but had kept it secret. Newspaper reports claimed that a tablet had been found inscribed with a deadly curse. Supposedly, it read, "Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh." The tablet was never found. The press suggested that the ancient Egyptians had harnessed some mystical force to guard the tomb and its treasures. Carter and Carnarvon had breached the antechamber of Tutankhamun's tomb. But the body of the pharaoh was nowhere to be seen. There had to be another room. Before they could find out what lay beyond, they had to clear the antechamber of treasures that had lain in darkness for more than 3,000 years. It was the biggest mass media event of the 1920s. Out in the sunlight, the pharaoh's secret riches were paraded for all to see. Carter conducted the operation with meticulous care. For him, it was a dream come true. Lord Carnarvon recorded it for his album. With the antechamber empty, they could start the hunt for the real prize, the body of Tutankhamun. They knew he must be in the tomb, but where? Beneath a couch, they found a small hole, the entrance to another room. Could this be where the pharaoh lay? It turned out to be a simple storeroom. Undaunted, they turned their attention to an adjacent wall, symbolically guarded by 2 black and gold sentinels. Perhaps this concealed the body of a pharaoh who had died mysteriously more than 3,000 years before. Once again, Carnarvon was by Carter's side when the work began. This time, their efforts were rewarded with the glint of gold. As the weeks progressed, the truth became clear. At last, they had found the burial chamber, and next to it was the treasury. Inside lay even more priceless treasures, a hint that they must now be close to the pharaoh's mummy. Finally, they began opening the shrines in search of the mummy itself. 3 golden caskets, one inside the other, contained 3 coffins. The last was 300 pounds of solid gold. When they opened this final coffin, the mummy of Tutenkahmun was revealed, protected by a fabulous golden mask. But by the time Carter came face to face with the pharaoh, he was on his own, and Lord Carnarvon was dead. 10 days after the opening of the tomb, a mosquito had bitten Carnarvon on the face. No one thought anything of it. But within a few days, his health had deteriorated. The bite had become infected. Carnarvon returned to Cairo. By now, he had a raging temperature and was suffering from blood poisoning. In the early evening of April 5th, 1923, Lord Carnarvon staggered back to his hotel. 7 hours later, he was dead. But the strange happenings didn't stop there. The moment Carnarvon died, all the lights went out in Cairo. And simultaneously, back in England, Carnarvon's pet terrier howled and dropped dead. 2 years later, when Howard Carter finally examined Tutankhamun's mummy, he found a scar on its cheek in exactly the same place as Lord Carnarvon's mosquito bite. As the alleged curse had predicted, death had indeed come on wings. The apparent curse of Tutankhamun seemed to have been at work. And Lord Carnarvon was not the only person to meet an untimely end. 22 people directly related to the dig died prematurely. Could they all have been victims of the curse, or was it mere coincidence? Arthur Mace, a leading member of the expedition, was in a coma after working on the treasures, and within days he died of pneumonia. A radiologist who led the autopsy of the mummy collapsed from exhaustion and died of an unknown cause. Carter's colleague, Arthur Callender, had taken part in opening the grave. He died of pneumonia. As did American businessman George J. Gould. He was stricken by a high fever 24 hours after entering the tomb. That evening, he was dead. Back in England, the list continued. Lord Carnarvon's wife, Countess Elmina, also died from an insect bite. And his half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, died from blood poisoning. Richard Bethel was Lord Carnarvon's secretary. He passed away mysteriously at his London club. Then Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, wrote a suicide note blaming the curse and jumped from the roof of his London home to his death. The story of Tutankhamun's curse has enthralled the world for many years. But now, experts believe that something other than a mummy's revenge is to blame.
Spawned from the depths of doom comes the most fearful monster of the ages, to strike with paralyzing terror the despoilers of ancient tombs.
When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, many believed they had disturbed a pharaoh's rest and would fall victim to an ancient curse.
Eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket.
It was an idea already embedded in the public's imagination. Today in London, at the Royal College of Art, Sir Christopher Frayling traces the origins of the curse back to journalists who were captivated by the idea of the revenge of King Tut.
Watching archaeology is like watching paint dry. You know, the movie footage gives you an idea of what it must have been like, and nothing happens at all. Just a few Edwardian gentlemen in three-piece tweed suits and pith helmets coming out, staggering out, carrying bits of couches and bits of chariot and all that. So you've got frustrated journalists with nothing left to write about, and a huge public appetite created for stories about King Tut.
Within weeks of opening the tomb, Lord Carnarvon dies.
And then the press went mad, because here was the story they'd been waiting for. Here was the angle that they'd been waiting to construct. Enter the curse of King Tut, that because he'd opened the tomb, he was going to get it, you know. And then from then on, whenever anybody remotely connected with the dig caught a cold, the papers would say, "Oh, I told you so."
When journalists found out that Carnarvon had been forewarned of his fate, their fascination with the mummy's curse reached fever pitch.
The mummy. Is it dead or alive?
Hollywood really cements this by producing The Mummy.
You'll feel the awful, creeping, crawling terror that stands your hair on end.
It's wonderful. It really is a brilliant piece of movie making. And in that, you've got the seeds of every future mummy movie and the mythologization of the curse.
Carnarvon, it appeared, had paid the price for desecrating an ancient Egyptian tomb.
He who robs the graves of Egypt dies.
I think society felt at some fairly deep level these archaeologists had it coming to them, that because this taboo had been broken, they were going to be punished. They ought to be punished for it. A kind of desecration was going on.
Whatever the answer, the threat of a curse does little to deter the millions of tourists who visit Egypt every year. Here, they enjoy the peace and tranquility of the Nile and lose themselves in the world of the ancient Egyptians. The mysteries surrounding Tutankhamun are a special draw. This land of ancient wonders is also a mecca for archaeologists, known as Egyptologists. They come not to look for the curse, but to find out more about the ancient Egyptians. British scientist Dr. Aidan Dodson is one of them. He dismisses the notion of a curse. Instead, he's fascinated by the life and death of Tutankhamun. Dodson travels to Egypt from Britain's University of Bristol to solve one of the biggest riddles in archaeology.
I adore Egypt. When I get off the plane in Luxor or Cairo, I always feel very, very comfortable. It's a country where I just feel at home. I like the place, I like the people of now, and I also like the people who I study in the past.
It is more than 3,000 years since Tutankhamun died. Yet Dodson is determined to find out what happened to him. He starts here, in the ancient city of Luxor. At the time of Tutankhamun's death, this great city was the capital of ancient Egypt. It was called Thebes and was the most famous city in the world. Luxor sits opposite the Valley of the Kings on the banks of the River Nile. In Tutankhamun's time, this mighty river was the country's main artery. Dodson knows that the Nile played a vital role in the rituals that followed the death of Tutankhamun. He can also find significant clues about Tutankhamun in Luxor's Temple of Karnak. Sprawling over 200 acres, it is still the biggest temple ever built. Once, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt walked this magnificent hall with its 169 pillars. Today, it challenges the minds of the millions of tourists who visit Karnak every year. The temple holds vital clues for scientists like Dodson. He's trying to answer the question, who was this boy king? And piece together what happened at the time of Tutankhamun's death. For centuries, the only clues lay in the statues of Tutankhamun, like this one at Karnak.
Before Tutankhamun's tomb was found, we knew very little about him. We knew his name, we knew when he lived, we knew nothing about his relationships, his age, or anything like that.
The discovery of the tomb answered many questions, but of most interest was Tutankhamun's body, preserved for eternity by the death rituals of the high priests of ancient Egypt. The body provides invaluable evidence to scientific sleuths like Dodson.
The Egyptian belief was that for the spirit to survive efficiently in the next world, the body had to survive in this world.
This belief meant that the ancient Egyptians had to ensure that the bodies of their dead lasted forever. To achieve this, they developed a complex set of rituals. When a pharaoh like Tutankhamun died, his body was transported across the River Nile, a journey symbolic of the transition from life to death. Boats sailed towards the setting sun and the afterlife. On the other side of the river, the mummification of Tutankhamun's body could begin. This whole area was an enormous necropolis, a city of the dead. More than 10,000 bodies are buried here. A macabre industry was devoted to the process of mummification, using practices to preserve the dead that are little understood today.
The first thing in mummification was to remove the internal organs. The viscera, the stomach, and liver were removed. The brain was then removed via the nose. A narrow chisel would be inserted into the nostril to breaking the bone at the back of the nose. And then a bent wire pushed up there and waggled around a bit would break up some of the brain tissue. If you left it for a couple of days, it would then liquefy and you were able to pour the brain out through the nose.
The corpse was then covered in salt to drain the body of its fluid. Finally, it was wrapped in linen. Tutankhamun was then buried in the Valley of the Kings, where he would lie in darkness for 3,000 years. Today, Dodson is on his way there in his quest to find out how Tutankhamun died.
The Valley of the Kings has always been almost a holy grail of Egyptologists. There's probably a greater concentration of archaeology here than almost anywhere else in Egypt.
Aidan Dodson is visiting Tutankhamun's tomb in an attempt to find out if the boy king was murdered. He hopes to find vital clues that could help him track down the killer. Dodson knows that the tomb is much smaller than those normally built for a pharaoh, suggesting that Tutankhamun died unexpectedly. But the most important thing was the revelation that Tutankhamun was no more than 20 years old when he died. So, had he been murdered?
From the moment of the discovery, and the discovery that he was a young man when he died, there was speculation of what he died of. But it wasn't until the late 1960s that there were any clues even to a potential cause of death.
In 1968, Tutankhamun's coffin was opened for the first time in 5 decades. The mummy was unwrapped and its head removed. The scientists were about to discover something sinister. An X-ray revealed a fragment of displaced bone at the back of his skull, an indication of a massive blow to the back of the head. This piece of bone could be a sign that Tutankhamun had been murdered. If so, Dodson wants to know who killed him and why.
There's probably three candidates one could think of. One is the General Ai, who was Tutankhamun's eventual successor. There was the General Horemheb, who was the king's deputy and was ultimately to succeed Ai as pharaoh. But also there was the king's wife, Ankhesenamun.
Many believe General Ai to be the prime suspect. During Tutankhamun's reign, he was the head of the military. Ai became pharaoh after Tutankhamun died, even though he was not from the same bloodline. A painting on the walls of the tomb suggests that Ai was trying to cover up his guilt.
There's a unique scene of the king's mummy having last rites being paid to it by his successor, King Ai. That scene is not found in any other Egyptian royal tomb, and probably it's Ai trying to emphasise that he was actually doing the right thing as by carrying out the last rites and therefore was the legitimate heir to the throne.
It seems that Ai had a motive for murder. But there are other possible explanations.
Ways of banging your head other than somebody whacking you over the head. Tripping over, hunting accident. It's possible that Tutankhamun may have actually engaged in some warfare, in death in battle.
Whatever the cause of his death, Tutankhamun was buried alongside a vast hoard of treasures. But even these are said to carry the curse. Egypt is one of the most popular destinations in Africa. An important stop for visitors is the capital, Cairo. With its population of almost 17 million, Cairo is one of the biggest and most densely populated cities in the world. Just 30 years ago, this bustling city was the backdrop to a series of deaths that some blamed on the curse of Tutankhamun. After the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the treasures were transported to the capital's Egyptian museum. Almost a third of the museum is devoted to Tutankhamun's treasures, which were once crammed into the tiny tomb. And this is one of the most valuable objects in the world. Millions have gazed at it in awe. It's the solid gold death mask chiseled off the face of Tutankhamun. Today, these invaluable treasures are back on display in Cairo. But in 1970, they went on a world tour. With the movement of the treasures, many believed that the curse of the mummy rose again. At the Egyptian Museum, the director of antiquities believed that Tutankhamun's treasures should stay in Egypt. On leaving a meeting on the subject, he stepped into a seemingly clear road. And was killed instantly by a passing car. In 1972, his successor, Dr. Gamal Merez, died of a stroke the night after he had organized the treasures to be sent to England. Ian Lansdowne was one of the Air Force crew that transported the treasures to London. It was a flight the crew would never forget. Each met fateful calamities. Lansdowne fell from a ladder and is crippled to this day. Soon after, the house of the plane's navigator was burnt to the ground, and 2 other crew members suffered fatal heart attacks. Now safely back on display in Egypt, Tutankhamun's treasures hold many clues that may help explain the existence of a curse. Dr. Salima Ikram is an Egyptologist based in Cairo and a world expert on the treasures of Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun captured the popular imagination because his tomb was filled with gold. And it really emphasizes the grandeur of ancient Egypt and also some of its mystique and exotica.
Ever since Westerners first came to Egypt, they believed the Egyptians held some kind of age-old wisdom that allowed them to weave potent forms of magic.
People always want to believe that the ancient Egyptians had secret, mysterious powers and that they had magic, and I think this desire for the Egyptians to be special is one of the things that has helped generate and keep alive this idea of the curse of the mummy. I think the idea of having magical protection in tombs and having curses and having this great sort of force is something that is been long current in Western culture.
Ikram's research finds no curse of Tutankhamun, but earlier tombs do contain threats to violators.
In Old Kingdom tombs, some curses or warnings really have been found, but they generally threaten people who come in an impure state to be, that they will be punished by the gods of the hereafter and the great god as well as the great council of gods. One or two texts actually say a great bird will come from the sky and sort of do nasty things to you, and you might be trampled by a hippo, eaten by a crocodile, or stung by a snake or a scorpion. Certainly things like curses and so on, I think, are really more effective if you believe in them.
Ikram puts the spate of sinister deaths down to coincidence rather than strange mystical forces.
Everyone makes a big fuss about how the lights went out when Lord Carnarvon died, but certainly at that time, and even today, the lights go out in Cairo quite a bit. And the dog died, and that's sort of a well-documented fact, because sometimes when someone is in one country and their pet is in another country, for some reason or the other, the pet does feel that its owner has died, and it lets out a wail of anguish and then passes out dead too.
50 years later, when the treasures were shipped to the US, the public still wasn't taking any chances.
In the 1970s, when Tutankhamun's treasures went to the United States, people whose grandparents had traveled in Egypt before and purchased mummies were terribly worried about the curse. So in the mornings, the museum people would find that they had received packages containing boxes filled with mummy fragments that people who were very worried and had sent them back to these museums saying, please take these back to Egypt, because when our grandfather went, he brought back this bit of mummy, and I'm sure it's got a curse on it because our family fortunes have never been the same since.
But strange events have occurred more recently to those who visit the Valley of the Kings and the ancient tomb of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's body lies in a golden coffin shaped in his own image. Ever since its discovery in 1922, people have attributed many strange happenings to his supposed curse. In 1992, Sir Christopher Frayling spent 6 weeks in Egypt filming a television series about the boy king.
Dark forces in the land of the pharaohs.
I was standing in the tomb talking about the corpse of Tutankhamun, and just as I got to the description of the curse, all the lights went out. And you haven't really experienced darkness till you've experienced darkness in a tomb where you can't actually see the entrance. It was incredibly frightening, but I don't think it was the curse. I think we blew the mains.
The film crew moved to Cairo.
The worst thing that happened was that just before we were leaving at this hotel in Cairo, I got into the lift on the 26th floor, and there was a doing, and we started moving down the lift shaft very fast indeed. It went and then stopped. And I got an instant migraine. I was sick when I realised what had happened. And I must admit, I looked up just in case the boy king was there with a hacksaw, like in the Phantom of the Opera, you know, cutting through these metal hawsers. I don't think you need the curse to explain it, but I must admit, we were absolutely sort of convinced, and we kept saying, oh my God, King Tut's on our tail, and he's going to come and get us for desecrating the tomb. It was quite scary, actually.
But perhaps the high number of deaths relating to the opening of the tomb can be explained in other ways. There is a man who believes that they can. Dr. Nasri Iskander is an Egyptian scientist who specializes in the sealed environments of tombs, as well as the mummies that inhabit them.
I don't believe in that curse, ever in my life. It's all science, and there is another explanation all the way.
Over the course of his career, Dr. Nasri has worked on hundreds of mummies and been inside countless tombs. Today, he's working on the 3,000-year-old mummy of the pharaoh Ramses II. Dr. Nasri has 27 royal mummies in his care, with one notable exception.
We don't have the mummy of Tutankhamun here. It's still there in the tomb itself. But we have his father and maybe his older brother also.
Dr. Nasri's work proves that when a tomb remains sealed for thousands of years, the oxygen is gradually used up by microorganisms inside it. Once the oxygen is exhausted, the microorganisms go into a kind of everlasting hibernation. But when a tomb is breached, everything changes.
Once you start to open the tomb, the oxygen starts to raise again. It activates the bacteria and viruses and fungus. All of them start to move again.
The viruses come back to life with a vengeance and strike down the vulnerable. Perhaps this accounts for the heavy death toll among the elderly gentlemen who were involved in opening the tomb. Considering such risks, Dr. Nasri has been lucky.
To me, I'm working with the mummies for more than 30 years. We are still working, and with no harm to ourselves, me and my team. It's perfect.
But did the ancients know how to harness another fatal force?
Now for one of the mad suggestions. The people who got ill or died by exposure to the tomb were irradiated by uranium poisoning, because part of the mummification process, the brand X, the ingredient X in making sure the mummies lasted forever, was burying them in sand with a high uranium content. The mummies got irradiated. So as you went into the tomb, bottled up in this tomb is all this radiation.
Around the world, some rocks do accumulate radioactivity. And that's true here in the Valley of the Kings. Some scientists have tried to prove that the ancient Egyptians did use radioactivity in the mummification process.
I have in fact been present at a demonstration with a Geiger counter in the anatomy department at Cairo University, where somebody stood there and buzz, 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 buzz. And I mean, I completely accept that nobody quite knows how mummification was done, because the ancient Egyptians were a lot better at it than we are. So yes, there was an ingredient X, but I don't believe that it was radiation.
Mystery still surrounds the death of the boy king Tutankhamun and the existence of his curse.
I mean, you'd think actually that people are a little bit fed up with stories about curses and mummies coming back and everything, but it still seems to have mileage in it, and thereby hangs a tale.
Travelers will never cease to come to the Valley of the Kings, still steeped in ancient magic. And Egypt remains one of the most intriguing countries in the world.